What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There are moments in geopolitics where one small border crossing, one railway line, one bureaucratic decision becomes the fuse that can ignite the entire region. And very few places in the world carry as much explosive potential as that narrow strip of land connecting Russia to its beloved and isolated outpost Kaliningrad. For decades, Lithuania allowed Russian transit goods to pass between the mainland and the exclave, even after sanctions tightened and relations shattered. But imagine, just for a moment, what happens if Lithuania decides to shut the door completely again? No rail, no trucks, no sanctioned products, no exceptions, no quietly negotiated allowances, nothing, just a clean blockade. A sealed border, a geopolitical guillotine. The region already feels like a pressure cooker from within, with economic decay, paranoia, and isolation dragging Kaliningrad closer to breaking point. So what happens if the European Union's most Russia-traumatized member state, Lithuania, just has enough? What happens if Vilnius pulls the plug on the only lifeline that still ties Kaliningrad to the rest of the Russian Federation? So today, let's dive into the military panic, the diplomatic hysteria, the economic shockwaves, and the human consequences that would erupt the very same moment Lithuania shuts that door, and how one small Baltic nation could accidentally expose the Kremlin's biggest regional weakness. The Baltic choke point Putin pretends does not exist, the choke point that can bring more real troubles to Russia than Ukrainian war or Chinese fake friendship. Just picture the morning the announcement drops. Lithuania issues a statement. All Russian land transit to Kaliningrad is suspended indefinitely due to escalating security concerns, hybrid threats, and Moscow's continuous hostile behavior. Europe obviously backs it, citing treaty provisions and security clauses, and just like that, the fragile artery connecting Kaliningrad to the Russian mainland collapses. That's it. No more inbound steel, construction materials, machinery, chemicals. No outgoing exports, no heavy good trains, no semi-trucks, nothing. For a region that relies on imports for nearly everything, from fuel to industrial parts to basic construction supplies, this becomes a brutal choke. Russia immediately frames it as an act of aggression, obviously, a blockade, a declaration of hybrid war. The Kremlin calls immediate emergency meetings, military officials start demanding contingency plans, and the state TV turns into 24/7 feeding frenzy of patriotic outrage. They scream that NATO is strangling Russia. We told you. That Lithuania is being used as pawn, that Moscow must respond decisively before the exclave falls. But the truth hits them hard behind closed doors. Because without Lithuania, Russia suddenly becomes powerless to supply one of its most strategically sensitive regions. And unlike the fantasies on state television, Russia's options are extremely limited. The military begins analyzing the only alternatives, sea and air routes. But maritime transport is slow, monitored, expensive, and vulnerable. Airlift is even worse. Planes can bring food and medicine, sure, but not hundreds of thousands of tons of industrial materials. Kaliningrad cannot function on symbolic shipments and just patriotic cheers. Do it! We're with you guys. And inside the region, panic spreads. Supermarkets are suddenly filled with people stocking up on anything they can grab, because they remember 2022 when similar restrictions caused shortages and price spikes within days. Local officials reassure the population, of course, with the usual empty promises, but, well, nobody believes them anymore. How could you? How can? Kaliningrad residents already feel abandoned by Moscow, Their industries rely on mainland supplies, their energy grid is fragile, their economy has been stagnant for years, and now this last umbilical cord gets cut. The very next morning, tensions explode between Moscow and Vilnius, but even the Kremlin understands something unbearable. They can yell, threaten, shout all they want, posture, and absolutely nothing will reopen that border unless Europe agrees. For the first time in decades, Russia has absolutely no leverage in the region where it once dreamed of projecting dominance. So what's going to be left then for them? Just panic on the inside, come up with some crazy solutions, portray on the outside the illusion of stability, world famous, everything's under control, there is no need for panic. But will it work this time though? When the actions and consequences are just so obvious, just people can see them. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. Now let's walk into the nightmare scenario inside the Kremlin's war rooms, because this is where fantasy collides headfirst with reality. Russian hardliners immediately begin pushing for a response, something dramatic enough to intimidate Lithuania and demonstrate that Russia still has power. They float ideas ranging from cyber attacks to retaliatory sanctions to even military corridors through Lithuanian territory. Yes, what they kinda imagine is just bulldozing a path through NATO land, well, the same people who promised to take Kiev in 3 days. And these same people now suggest establishing a land bridge through a country protected by Article 5. I mean, it's delusional, of course, but war has made delusion a standard political instrument in Moscow. However, Russia's general staff knows the truth even if propagandists don't. Baltic formations are not that weak anymore, just like in 2014. Suwalki Gap, this narrow corridor between Kaliningrad and Belarus, is now monitored, fortified, and blocked by thousands of rotating NATO troops ready to respond within minutes. Any Russian attempt to break through Lithuania would not be a local operation. It would trigger a European war Russia absolutely cannot sustain. And I'm not even speaking about winning. The Kremlin may be reckless, but it's not self-destructive. And yet, doing absolutely nothing as well carries a different danger. It exposes Russia's weakness. If Russia accepts a full Lithuanian shutdown without retaliation, it signals to the world, and to Russian citizens importantly, that Moscow cannot protect its own territory, that Kaliningrad is not a fortress but a hostage, that despite all the talk of Eurasian power, Russia simply cannot even guarantee supplies to its own people, 800 kilometers away. This is the political nightmare Putin fears the most. The regime survives on the illusion of strength, and once that illusion collapses, and one day it will, cracks appear everywhere. Among the elites, the regional governors, even inside the military. Especially inside the military, I would say. Kaliningrad is supposed to be a symbol of Russian pride, a European outpost of strategic significance. Instead, it just becomes a live demonstration of the Kremlin's complete helplessness. Russian generals scrambled to propose symbolic actions, military exercise in the Baltic Sea, rerouting naval patrols, deploying missile brigades, you know, all this kind of stuff, basically aiming to threaten and to target the NATO bases. But these are just theatrical gestures, not strategic solutions. They scare nobody in Brussels or Washington anymore. And Lithuania, confident in NATO backing and decades of dealing with Russian intimidation, simply does not blink, does not react at all. And so, Russia finds itself in the worst possible position, humiliated, cornered, unable to escalate without destroying itself. The same country that tries to project absolute power suddenly appears small, isolated, and incapable of responding to a crisis of its own border. And by no means, guys, I'm belittling Lithuania if some of you are from this country. It's a great country. But many expect Russia to be put down by America, China, or maybe India. But Lithuania, I mean, come on, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Predecessors would be ashamed. Anyways, Kaliningrad being totally isolated from the rest of Russia by a single Eastern European country will have its consequences, significant ones, primarily inside Kaliningrad itself. Let's talk about it in more details in our next chapter. Let's zoom inside Kaliningrad itself, because that is where things get truly explosive. The region is already struggling under sanctions. Investments dried up long time ago, young people are leaving in record numbers, factories are idling, businesses survive on government subsidies that keep shrinking every single month. And now with Lithuania sealing the land corridor, the pressure becomes absolutely unbearable. Fuel prices spike within days. Construction halts because building materials simply run out. There's none left. Car parts become scarce. Grocery stores ration goods. Pharmacies start reporting shortages. And the people of Kaliningrad, who historically always saw themselves as more European, more connected to the outside world, now start asking questions they were too afraid to ask before. If you have nothing to lose, what to be afraid of, right? The questions like, why are we suffering for a war that we did not start? Why did this region, which never asked to be militarized, become the victim of Moscow's geopolitical fantasies? Why does the Kremlin insist everything is under control, everything is good, when our shelves are empty and our bills keep rising? People will see this with their own eyes, there's no way to ignore it. The resentment that was quietly brewing explodes into frustration. The younger generations sees no future, middle-aged workers see no income, and pensioners see no stability. And the Kremlin knows this. They know Kaliningrad is one of the most politically sensitive regions in the entire federation, because it has something no other Russian region has: perspective. Kaliningrad residents have traveled to Europe. They know what normality looks like. They know how average European life compared to average Russian. They understand how far behind Russia has fallen. And now they are being punished even further. Moscow tries to smother the anger with propaganda, of course, emergency subsidies, speeches about Western aggression, and promises to reroute trade through sea and potentially air. But the people know better. They see military build-up, the missile deployments, the paranoia of local commanders. They see that the border with Poland becomes more tense and impossible, if even possible at all, to cross. They feel the fear in the air as Moscow starts quietly preparing for potential unrest by reinforcing security units and monitoring local activists. Kaliningrad becomes a boiling pot with the lid welded shut, and with no way for pressure to escape, no land transit, the internal collapse accelerates. And suddenly, conversations about separatism, autonomy or special status re-emerge. Not because people dream of independence, but because they are tired of being punished for Moscow's decisions, for Putin's decisions. The Kremlin is terrified of these conversations, because if Kaliningrad begins to seriously question its future inside Russia, the psychological blow to Moscow would be catastrophic. Now let's quickly switch to the European side, because Lithuania does not just shut door without careful calculation. Vilnius remembers 50 years of Soviet occupation. They remember the deportations, repressions, tanks rolling through their streets, and they know that if Russia ever regains strength, the Baltics would be their first target. So Lithuania tightens transit to Kaliningrad is not just symbolic, it's a preemptive defense strategy. By choking Russia's access to its westernmost region, Lithuania exposes the limits of Russian power before Moscow can even dream of expanding its influence again. Meanwhile, Europe frames the move as a legal and security necessity. The West responds to the Russian threats with calm indifference, simply reminding Moscow that transit privileges are not obligations and that sovereignty is a two-way street. NATO quietly reinforces its Baltic units, increases troop presence and rotations in Lithuania, Latvia and Poland. Washington maybe even issues a statement emphasizing that any attack on Lithuania is the attack on the entire alliance. And all of this sends a crystal clear message to Moscow, straight into the Kremlin, straight to Putin's computer. You cannot, guys, intimidate us anymore. But the most important consequence is psychological. Lithuania proves that a small democratic nation with a population barely above 2 million can challenge Russia and win. Not by firing a shot, but by exposing the hollowness of Moscow's threats. The Kremlin is pretty much all bark but no bite. The Russian public watches as their government fails to reopen the corridor and then fails to retaliate in any meaningful way. The myth of an unstoppable Russia crumbles once again. And meanwhile, Kaliningrad's economic crisis spills over into a political unrest, which Moscow tries desperately to contain. Europe, observing the internal fractures, quietly strengthens its hybrid defense strategies, prepares contingency plans for humanitarian relief if Kaliningrad reaches breaking point, and then also coordinates with Poland and Germany for any possible escalation. So as a result, Lithuania, the smallest player in this drama, emerges as one holding the old leverage. What started as a choke on goods becomes a choke on Russian pride, Kremlin's strategy, and Putin's illusions. Well, ahead guys, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, the best way to do is to becoming our Patreon member, because there is an additional chapter waiting for you at the end of this video. The link is down below. Thanks much for watching. See you on Wednesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe